Hello, my friend, and welcome to Wisdom Trek. This is Guthrie Chamberlain, and I'm your guide to wisdom and creating a living legacy. Thank you for joining us for our 7-day-a-week, 7 Minutes of Wisdom podcast. This is day 293 of our trek, and yesterday we hiked the 13th trail of this trek, which was the Trail of Discipleship. Today we'll explore a related trail which help us to put practical content into what we explored yesterday as we hike on the Trail of the Process of Discipleship. There is a total of 18 trails on this trek, which we are calling the Principles of Spiritual Growth. This has been adopted from a short book written by Miles J. Stanford. These practical lessons were instrumental in my spiritual growth as a young man seeking to create and live my legacy. As we continue on the trail each day, I trust that you'll find this information valuable in your life, regardless of where you happen to be in your own faith trek. Each of the trails on this hike do build on the previous one, so if you do miss any of the days of our Wisdom Trek, please go to wisdom-trek.com to listen to them and to read the daily journal. We are recording our podcast from our studios at Home 2 in Charlotte, North Carolina. If all goes according to plan, we will be heading to the big house on the day this episode is originally released. We do hope to get a lot more renovation work completed while we're in Marietta this time. Paula should arrive back from her visit with Aunt Pauline late Friday night. It's been a great visit for her, and we're certainly glad that she made the choice to invest the time with her Aunt Pauline. Speaking of investing time, as we head out on our hike today, we want to discover how best to invest our time in the process of becoming a disciple of Christ. As with every activity that we integrate into our lives, let's change our mentality from spending time to investing time. When we invest time, it has a return on it, just like a monetary investment. The difference is when we invest time, it can have an eternal return. This is part of living our legacy each day. Our trail for today is the Trail of the Process of Discipleship. We need to learn this process to become an effective disciple. This is the 14th of 18 trails which make up the trek, which we are calling the Principles of Spiritual Growth. One of the best analogies in the process of discipleship is found in the parable of the sower, which is taken from Luke chapter 8, verse 15, where it says, "And the seeds that fell on the good soil represent honest, good-hearted people who hear the word of God, cling to it, and patiently produce a huge harvest." Now this shows a distinct process of growth through patience. A parallel passage to this, which gives us an analogy of a return, is Mark chapter 4, verse 8. "Still other seeds fell on fertile soil. They sprouted, grew, and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted." There is a theme throughout the Bible of what it takes for solid growth to produce a good return in our lives. It is integral to the process of discipleship if discipleship is going to be long-lasting. A farmer completely understands this concept that is also mentioned in James chapter 5, verse 7. "Dear brothers and sisters, be patient as you wait for the Lord's return. Consider the farmer who patiently waits for the rain in the fall and in the spring. They eagerly look for a valuable harvest to ripen." So it does take time both for farming and to produce a good fruit in our own lives. Within our lives, there is a long season of growth. From the time where seeds fall on the fertile soil of our hearts, then they sprout and grow, and will eventually produce an abundant harvest in our lives that can also nourish others. So many Christ followers only get to the second or third stage in this life process towards discipleship. If you are just growing and not producing an abundant harvest, you'll never be able to reach the level where you can feed others. One important aspect that is missed by many Christ followers is that before a plant sprouts and grows, the original seed must die in order to bring out a new abundant harvest. As Christ was approaching his own crucifixion and death, he knew that he must die in order to bring forth new life. John chapter 4, verse 24 and 25 is Christ speaking, which he says, "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives. Those who love their lives in this world will lose it, and those who care nothing for their life in this world will keep it for eternity." To make sure that his closest disciples understood the process of discipleship, Christ provides further explanation in Mark chapter 8, verses 34 through 37. Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own ways, take up your cross, and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. If you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul?" So when the believer takes up his cross through the process of discipleship, the process of death begins to set in. The disciple finds himself a seed sown by the Son, planted in a home, an office, a shop, a hospital, a church, or even online social media as their place of ministry. Whatever or wherever it is, through the process of discipleship, there is to be death of self, from which the resurrection life follows. We need to enter deeply into the truth that Christ could not enter into his glory of heaven until he has first given himself over to death. This great truth will help us to understand how in our own lives and in our fellowship with Christ, we have to first surrender ourselves every day to die to sin and to self. It is then that we can abide in the unbroken fellowship of a disciple with our crucified and risen Lord. On our trek, The Principles of Spiritual Growth, today we learn the precise path that must be taken on the trail of the process of discipleship. Once we have fallen on the fertile soil of God's work, we must die to self so that we can grow and produce an abundant harvest. And then we will be used to feed those who hunger and thirst for God's justice. We must be patient through this process because it requires the proper nutrients, care, weeding, and most importantly, time. There is no shortcut in the process of discipleship. And through this process of discipleship, sometimes it does get wearisome. But tomorrow we will move on to our next trail, which is the Trail of Rest. Throughout the process of discipleship, which will last our entire lives, there must always be time for rest. Every trail that we're hiking on this trek will help us to create and live our legacy each day. So encourage your family and friends to join us, and then come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, Creating a Legacy. That will finish our podcast for today. Just as you enjoy these daily doses of wisdom, we ask you to help us to grow Wisdom Trek by sharing it with your family and friends through email, Facebook, Twitter, or in person as you meet with them, and invite them to come along with us each day. The journal for today's trek can be found at wisdom-trek.com. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, but most importantly, I am your friend, as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal each day. As we take this trek together, let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. This is Guthrie Chamberlain reminding you to keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and then create a great day every day. See you tomorrow.